Thank you for being here. I think that I may have been teaching a little bit too long, because when I saw it snowing on the way to church this morning, I was, I wonder if we might get a 2-hour delay tomorrow. But probably not going to happen, but that's where my thoughts went. So, good morning. It has been a great weekend. The calendar falls in a unique way this year that doesn't always happen, in that we have a weekend in between Thanksgiving and the start of Advent. And I really like that weekend when it's just slightly before all the chaos begins. Christmas is the most bipolar of holidays for me. I want to love it, and I do love many aspects of it, but it also seriously stresses me out every single year. It contains awkward family visits, buying gifts for people that I don't know well enough to buy a gift for, and I'm usually blowing the budget that I have very carefully made ahead of time. Speaking of blowing the budget, I did a little research this week as I was thinking about Advent beginning again. And do you know that the average American spent $837 on Christmas in 2022? That's a lot of money. They're claiming that they will spend $932 this year. Obviously, it was a Democrat survey. 35% of people will go into debt or take out a loan to afford to pay for their Christmas expenses. 35% of people in 2022. And this year in 2023, 25% of those people who took out a loan last year to afford the holidays are still paying that loan off. And I think when I read these things, as I do every year, that this isn't what it's supposed to be about. It shouldn't feel this way. I came across the following on social media this week that is attributed to a woman named Catherine Shea, who I do not know, but she was riding in the parking lot after attempting to shop for the holidays, and she said, "It was never meant to be a burden. Christmas was never meant to be a burden. Paying expedited shipping to make it magical and stressing about going into more debt and keeping up with all the pictures we see on social media is an absolute scam. A scam of evil proportions. Don't get me wrong, I've done it. That's how I know. It's a scam. We've got to let it go. I'm not going to pretend to know what that means for everyone, but I hope it gives you permission to release yourself from all the charades and parades and all the demands that are never ending. He came to free us, not to burden us." It was never meant to be a burden. And it made me wonder, how do we keep this miraculous time of Advent that we are preparing to celebrate from becoming a burden? How do we keep it a miracle, the miracle of Emmanuel? I believe, as I've studied in this week and listened to some other people and been doing some reading by Tim Keller, I found one of his quotes that made me feel like I might have a firmer handle on it this year. Keller says, "It's one thing to be grateful. It's another to give thanks. Gratitude is what you feel. Thanksgiving is what you do." When we must commit ourselves to thanksgiving constantly. When we are living in a spirit of thanksgiving, we are more focused on the things of God and less concerned with the things of the world. We can adore rather than acquire. And we can keep Christmas holy rather than hectic. Saying thank you is a rather common thing, although apparently it's not as common as it used to be, for I am still waiting for a thank you card from a bridal shower I went to last year. But when we say thank you, we've usually received something. Whether it's an item, an act of service, or a kind word, we are reciprocating, acknowledging the receipt of that kindness. It's commonly an automatic response to show that we have pleasure with what something else has done. The interaction happens quickly, as society has conditioned us to be thankful in that way. But this kind of thankfulness is short-lived. For example, do you remember everyone who has ever held a door open for you? Probably not, but you said thank you. Thank you is a surface level expression of approval towards another person, and it's something that we say or write, maybe, to express your feelings. How kind of you to do that. That was really nice. Thank you. Now, thanksgiving is something very different from saying thank you. Thanksgiving is action-oriented. It means we show our thankfulness or our indebtedness to another person through our deeds, through what we do, not just with our words. You see, we kind of flip it out. The way we say it, thanksgiving, kind of indicates that we give thanks when something has been given to us. The giving happens first, and then we give the thanks. But it should mean the way we say it. We give thanks and express thankfulness, and then we can give to others because we are thankful for what has already been done. We are able to participate in Thanksgiving because, first, we are thankful to God for what he has done. Turn with me, if you will, to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 17. I have preached on this particular passage before, and it's one of my favorites for a multitude of reasons. But this morning, it's a good way to help us remember as we head into the Advent season not to become burdensome. Now, on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him, and they stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." And when he saw them, he said, "Go, show yourself to the priests." And as they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. And Jesus asked, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner?" And then he said to him, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well." This account in the Gospel of Luke holds some incredibly important truths, yet it would be a mistake to read this and think it's just a reminder to say thank you, because it's much more than that. It's also much more than Jesus curing a rash on 10 guys hanging out on the road somewhere between Galilee and Jerusalem. To begin, we need to really understand what life was like for these 10 men, what it meant for them to have leprosy in the first century. Now, they most likely could have had any number of infectious skin diseases, including the leprosy that we now call in the modern world as Hansen's disease. And it's not an actual skin disease. Leprosy is a disease of the nervous system, as the bacteria that causes it attacks the nerves. It begins as a very painful disease, eating away at the nerves, and then many victims experience a total loss of physical pain, which then causes them to experience what would normally be very painful injuries as they can no longer sense touch or pain. They will experience the disfigurement of their skin and their bones, the twisting of their limbs, curling of their fingers to form a characteristic claw shape on their hands. They may even begin to lose their fingers and toes as their bones and skin are eaten away by the disease. It was, and it remains, a truly frightening disease. They would separate it, the people who had it, from the other people. We've done that up until very recently. Even in the United States, there was a laboratorium in Louisiana for people in the United States who had leprosy. And it functioned much in the same way as we used to send people with tuberculosis to live in places away from others and be cared for. It was also believed to be highly contagious in Jesus' time. Therefore, people who were thought to have leprosy were shunned by everyone except for other people with leprosy. They had to wear special clothing. They could not take care of their hair, which had usually turned white, And they had to call out before themselves everywhere they went, I'm unclean, I'm unclean, unclean. So that even if you didn't see them for some reason, you would know not to get too close. The people in the first century were paranoid about leprosy, kind of like we were at the height of COVID. You would be out in public in a store doing something, and even though everyone was wearing a mask, if someone coughed or sneezed, you immediately took a step back and freaked out a little bit. Now, we now know that that wasn't a necessary response to COVID, even if, like Ed, you didn't wear the masks. Just as the first century response to leprosy was not warranted, modern day leprosy is treated with a combination of antibiotics. The treatment is lengthy, but it's usually effective enough to offer a cure. And we now know that once antibiotics have begun, you're no longer contagious. But there were no antibiotics in the first century, and leprosy, therefore, becomes a walking, very painful, very lengthy, usually lasts between 20 to 30 years. It's a death sentence. And the lepers are actually called the walking dead by the Jews. And so Jesus is walking through this area on his way to Jerusalem. This is his last visit going into Jerusalem, by the way. And they call out to him, Jesus, Rabbi. We don't know for sure that they knew who he was, but they recognize him as a rabbi by what he was wearing as well. They probably don't know yet that he is the rabbi. You know, they know that some rabbis have been able to heal people, though, and maybe they have recognized that this is indeed Jesus of Nazareth, and they have heard the stories of his miraculous healings, so they call out to him. They need a miracle, and they have nothing to lose, so they say, Jesus, have pity on us. And he simply says, go and show yourself to the priests. He's referring to the law in Leviticus that says once you've been declared a leper, only the priests can release you from your sentence. Only the priest can declare you as clean. And nothing extraordinary happens yet, but when they obey what he says and they turn to go towards the priest, a physical healing happens for them. All 10 of them, they do what he tells them to do, and they experience healing. Imagine you've lived a life, years of pain and suffering and isolation, and as you move toward obedience, you can physically see the scales on your skin clear away. You can see your limbs being made straight and strong. You can see the color return to your hair, and you can feel the breath return to your lungs. And so 9 of them run as fast as their newly healed legs will carry them to the temple to be declared worthy by the priests, to be restored into community. He healed 10 men and 9 booked it back to Jerusalem without even a thank you escaping from their lips. Now, our modern Christmas celebrations can begin to feel that way. Lots of frantic running around with very little thank yous happening. So how does this story of Jesus' encounter with the Samaritan leper help us prevent a hectic holiday season? In 2 ways. First, we see here that Jesus is a gift that is available to all. It's non-returnable. It's one size fits all. It's always in season. It always fits. It always comes in the right color, size, and shape. We read in verse 15, one of them, when he saw he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice, and he threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. A Samaritan. Do you ever get the feeling that Jesus has a special soft spot for these marginalized people of his community? The woman at the well was a Samaritan. The star character of one of his most famous parables was a Samaritan. And now we have this man, a leper, also a Samaritan, who comes back to Jesus in thanksgiving, not simply saying thank you to him, but he throws himself at his feet. This man lives under a double whammy. He's a leper and a Samaritan. And it doesn't matter how fast his newly healed legs can get him to the temple because he's still a Samaritan. The priest may return him to community, but it's a community that will shun him and declare him as less than. He will still be hated by all the Jews, yet Jesus restores him, both physically and spiritually, telling him, "Rise and go, your faith has made you well." He lets him know and us know unequivocally that you do not need to be perfect. You do not need to live a perfect life that everyone would be jealous and envious of in order to receive a perfect gift. You can be very unperfect. I don't know if that's a word or not, but you can be very unperfect, in fact, and Jesus is still the right gift for you. The second thing is we can learn from this man is that when everyone else is frantically running somewhere else and feeling completely overwhelmed, he took stock of his life, turned around, and threw himself at the feet of Jesus. The word he uses when he approaches Jesus is Eucharista, meaning not just, hey, thanks, but it's, I'm giving thanks to you for the godly things that you have done. I am so overwhelmed by your sovereignty that I cannot help but give you thanks for it. Now, he may not have known exactly who Jesus was before he was healed, but he sure does now. Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, Emmanuel. And he gives thanks not just for what Jesus has done for him, but for who Jesus is. And we can do the same as we head into this Advent season by remembering who Jesus is. And when we become overwhelmed, to throw ourselves at his feet, to be in study. Find a devotional. They're everywhere this time of year. You can get an app on your phone. I encourage you, if you do nothing else, to look at the Gospel of Luke intentionally. You just have to read one chapter a day. By the time Christmas arrives, you will have studied the whole Gospel of Luke. I don't think it's a mistake that there are 25 days in Advent and there are 25 chapters in the book of Luke detailing the life of Christ. Embrace those every day. Pray. Find time to talk to Jesus and make him a part of your days in this Advent season. It's his birthday. Invite him to the party. Talk to him about your plans and what's going on. Help him to help you know your limits. Create a budget. Try to stick to it. Invest yourself in fun traditions that aren't about money, that are instead about giving and love and service. Avoid temptation. Stay out of the malls and the big box stores. If you need groceries, go to a store that only sells groceries. Then you're not tempted to go and look at other stuff. It might cost you a little bit more, but it's going to cost you a whole lot less than all the impulse purchases you're going to do in one of those bigger stores. And you might keep a family-owned business in business for another year. And we will see this all over social media and everywhere else this year, but truly, it's an important concept to remember. Focus on your presence and not presence. Be available to other people. Sit and figure out how can you give to another out of the thankful you have for what God has done for you, for the Eucharista. How can you help? Because he has loved you first. If you can't afford the fancy dinner that all your friends want to go serve at a homeless shelter instead. If you don't have enough money to buy gifts for all the children in your extended family, Call their parents and offer to babysit for them for 2 hours so they can go out and get a bite to eat, or they can wrap presents, or they can finish their shopping. You can do anything for 2 hours. Do the crowds overwhelm you too much? I feel ya. Go home and make a dinner and invite someone who's alone this time of year to come and share it with you. It may mean nothing to you, but they will never forget it. Look around your house at things that you might not use, that you know someone else could really benefit from. Sure, it's not a brand new gift, but it's a gift. Gift it that way. Tell a story about it. It will mean more to them that you saw it and thought about them than that you went out and just bought something that was on the shelf. The Samaritan man knew, just as we should know today, what a truly magnificent gift Jesus was and Jesus had given him. And that Emmanuel, God in our midst, was never meant to be a burden. So don't allow it to become a burden for you now. I remember last year I was so sad and upset, and I didn't shop at all this weekend. And guess what? Advent is still coming, whether I buy things or not. But anyways, last year I looked all over Tippecanoe County for nativity sets, and I found them in one store. And that made me sad. What would it look like if we entered into this Advent season so overwhelmed by our thankfulness for what God has done that we have no choice but to go and throw ourselves at his feet? How would thankfulness for what we have already received from God allow us to give more freely back to God? How would our prayer life look different? How would our servanthood be different? How would our general attitudes be different? What kind of spouse, parent, child, neighbor, co-worker would we be if we viewed other people in our lives as gifts from God deserving of thanksgiving? It is super hard to be envious of what someone else has or is doing when you're busy praising God for the blessings he's already given you. Emmanuel is coming. There is so much in that statement alone that should take our breaths away and drive us to throw ourselves at the feet of God, giving every ounce of thanks we have back to him. What an amazing gift he's given us, available to every single one of us. And we don't need to run ourselves ragged trying to find it in the perfect color or size, and we don't need to take out a loan to purchase it because it's given freely. It's not a burden. For Christ tells us that his yoke is easy and his burden is light. As Advent approaches this year, let us remember all the ways we have already been blessed by him. Giving thanks not only lessens the burdens of the world's frantic celebrations, it also helps us. It lowers depression and blood pressure. It increases our satisfaction in our work and in our relationship, and we sleep better. Those are all things that we desperately need this time of the year. It seems we have everything to gain and nothing to lose from being active in the Eucharist, being thankful for the things of God rather than the things of the world. Now, before we begin our final hymn, I would like to take 1 minute to do something a little bit different. Don't groan yet. I would like for you to turn to someone sitting near you and very quickly in the next minute share 10 things that you are grateful for as we head into this Advent season. May we focus in this time on giving thanks rather than bearing burdens. Go. Yeah, I hope so. right, it's good to hear you laugh as you're sharing with one another the blessings you hold in your life. And I pray that as we enter into this, you're not done yet? I'm glad. I'm glad. I pray as we enter into Advent, you will hold on to the things you just shared. And I also want you to know, I heard a little voice said that I'm thankful that Jesus loves me. She always has a good benediction for my stuff. So let's go ahead and sing our hymn today and sing it in a spirit of thanksgiving.